We'll come to order now. Please welcome to the June 1st, 2021 meeting of the Salem Planning Commission. Shelby, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Augustine is absent excused. Commissioner Griggs?
Here.
Commissioner Heller?
Here.
Commissioner Kopcho?
Present.
Commissioner McKinley?
Here.
Commissioner Pollock?
Here.
Commissioner Schweikart?
Here.
Commissioner Slater?
Here.
And Commissioner Levin has not arrived yet.
Thank you, Shelby. We'll pay attention to see when he signs on. Moving to item 3, the consent calendar. Before I look to Commissioner Heller for a motion, I do need to ask Commissioners Kopcho and Schweikart if you're prepared to vote on the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, or if you'd rather abstain from the vote. If you could do a verbal response, that would be great.
Yes, I did listen to the recording of the last meeting and I'm prepared to vote on the minutes.
Thank you. Commissioner Kopcho.
Likewise, the city staff was kind enough to send over a link to be able to do that.
Fabulous. Great. So Commissioner Heller, do you have a motion?
I move that we accept the minutes from the May 18th meeting.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is that Vice President McKinley is a second? Discussion on the motion? Seeing no hands raised. Shelby, would you please call the roll and signify by saying aye if you're in favor of approving that motion?
Commissioner Griggs?
Aye.
Commissioner Heller?
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho?
Aye.
Commissioner McKinley?
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock?
Aye.
Commissioner Schweikart?
Aye.
And Commissioner Slater?
Aye.
And Commissioner Augustine is absent. Levin is absent currently.
Thank you. Moving on to 4.1, which is deliberations on CPC ZC 21-01 for the 681 Reese Hill Road Southeast. Again, I would like to ask Commissioners Kopcho and Schweikart if they've reviewed the materials for this case, and if you could give us a verbal response. Commissioner Schweikart.
Yes, I was able to review the previous 5.1 item as well as the 2 subsequent staff reports and was able to listen to the recording. So I feel comfortable contributing to this discussion and voting.
Okay, and do you have any conflicts of interest to state since you?
I do not.
Thank you. Commissioner Kopcho, your turn.
Yes. Yes and no. So yes, I feel confident in my ability to contribute. I was able to read the staff report supplemental and do not have any known conflicts of interest.
That's awesome. And so for the rest of the commissioners, are there any ex parte contacts that you've had since our last meeting? Seeing none. Pamela, would you please give us a kind of a summary of where we are to this point?
Yes. So on May 11th, staff made the Planning Commission report available. And on May 18th, we also provided a supplemental staff report. May 18th, we received a request from Department of Land Conservation and Development to hold the record open so that they could review city's Goal 10 findings that were contained in that May 18th supplemental staff report. And the Planning Commission did grant the request to hold the record open until 5 p.m. on May 25th. Staff prepared some supplemental findings to answer questions regarding funding sources for the park and the Lone Oak Road Southeast extension. And we also received comments from Department of Land Conservation and Development acknowledging that our Goal 10 findings were adequate. So we provided those in a May 25th supplemental staff report. So those items and the May 18th presentation are the items that you may deliberate this evening.
Thank you, Pamela. Do we have questions of Ms. Cole at this point? Actually, this is our only point for questions. So raise your hand if you do. Giving you guys a few minutes to find that icon. And I am not seeing, Commissioner Schweikart.
Thanks. I just had one small thing, which is that I really appreciate Josh adding as into the record the maps from the latest park plan update, and because I just felt like that was a really helpful visual. So I guess I would just say, Pamela, if it's possible in the future, if we get any more park requests, I would love to see these maps. These are really great.
Especially
We can do
since,
that.
especially since we only have Commissioner Pollock through the end of the year. She's not going
Yeah.
to save us. Any other questions of Ms. Cole at this time? So I will look to Vice President McKinley for a motion.
Sorry, I was looking for the button. Madam President, I move that we adopt the report on public hearing 4.1.
And do I have a second?
Second by Slater.
Thank you. That's so helpful when you tell me because I can't call that quickly. Discussion on the motion. Commissioner Pollock.
Okay, I've drafted a response so that I don't wander off on this. So there are 3 areas I would respectfully like to point out during the deliberations, and these points reference map 3 of 203 Parks Master Plan. First, the map 3 indicates part of the park city goals is to place a community park within the vicinity of this subject property. As we lean towards smart growth traits of live, work, and play within pedestrian and walking area, this arises as a means of greenhouse reduction. A community park is capable of housing a ballpark, a baseball court, a tennis court, a pickleball court, a skate park, or a combination thereof. So when you're located within a neighborhood, this park would certainly meet the goals of both a community park as well as a smart growth asset. So it's within, again, pedestrian and biking area. Secondly, it is reported that this property was acquired as part of the Devon land application process, which noted a condition for requiring a neighborhood park. However, given the reported growth of the area, as reported it by staff, meeting the community park goals seemed more appropriate. I have faith that during the acquisition deliberations, Park Advisory Board weighed all the options of this financially burdensome characteristics of this property in choosing where to place a community park in this area. And then lastly, I understand that payment towards the Lone Oak reimbursement district fees encumbered on this property will come from parks funding. I was considered that it was considered that I considered that by changing the zone to what is requested, PA, that it would immediately create a repayment obligation. And now we know it's a $50,000 fee. However, this fee, I understand now, will not actually become due until the city pulls building permits to begin construction of the park. Thus, this action we do today will not immediately affect the current city budget, which I was worried would happen the minute we change the zone. So for these and other reasons reflected in the staff report and all the information in the record, I will support staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Pollock. And before I get to you, Commissioner Schweikart, just Shelby, to note that Ian signed on just shortly after 5:30 for your notes.
It is noted.
Thank you. Commissioner Schweikart.
Thank you. I didn't want to frame this as a question to staff, but I wanted to say that, as we're moving through our Salem process, it really does highlight the future land use choices and how we see kind of our long-term urbanization of our land in maybe a different way than it did before we were working on our Salem. And so, the sharing of this map 3 of the proposed park system, really what it highlighted to me is how many proposed neighborhood parks, and in this case, community parks, are slated to be built right at the Salem city limits and also right at our urban growth boundary. And the reason why I wanted to flag that is because, you know, to me, there's this question of if we're building amenities such as this recreational amenity so close to those limits, are we incentivizing or attracting additional development to try to push these boundaries? Are we kind of putting fuel on this flame to try to push ourselves further and further out? Which I think is is the opposite approach that we're trying to take in the Our Salem priorities, which is to propose more infill development and trying to stay away from and preserve the urban growth boundary as it currently exists. So I know that this park system plan has already been adopted. It was adopted way back in 2013. And I know that was a very different city council, though, that approved it. So I would hope that maybe there could be a revisiting of, how this plan potentially impacts our land use patterns, moving forward as we're looking at those patterns within the Our Salem initiative. Because it just strikes me how clearly, at least how clearly to me, this would make the argument to push those boundaries further. So that's my comment, but I will be supporting this item today.
Great comments. And I'm not sure, Lisa Anderson Ogilvy, if you want to respond to that, but I think but to cite those community parks, it requires a bit of land, and to find those pockets of land near residential housing is a challenge, I think, for the staff. But Lisa, did you want to say anything in response to?
Hi, this is Lisa Angelo. For the record, I was going to say what you say, Commissioner Griggs, and Eunice is on here for the work session, so she's listening to your comments, Commissioner Schweikart. But just to state for the record, we do expect the Parks Master Plan will be updated as soon as Our Salem is done. So the Transportation Plan and the Parks Master Plan will start on their own update. So hopefully we can get kind of all the plans working together shortly. But thanks for those comments.
I appreciate that. And I do not, envy that, jigsaw puzzle of trying to put together that acreage to make those parks. I totally understand it. And I think it's just kind of like a, where's the give and take, right? And that's hopefully what something like a or not master plan, the Our Salem update can think about, as where the give and take exists.
Got it. Any other discussion on this motion before us? Not seeing any hands raised. So Shelby, would you please call the roll and signify by aye if you're in favor of the motion? Nay if you're not.
Commissioner Griggs?
Aye.
Commissioner Heller?
Aye.
Commissioner Kopcho?
Aye.
Commissioner Levin?
Aye.
Commissioner McKinley?
Aye.
Commissioner Pollock?
Aye.
Commissioner Schweikart?
Aye.
Commissioner Slater?
Aye.
And Commissioner Augustine is absent.
Thank you, Shelby. So we'll move on to item 5.1, the Unified Development Code Amendment Work Session. So we're ready for staff's report on that.
Okay, well, great. Thank you. Commissioner President Griggs, members of the Planning Commission, Bryce Bishop here with the Salem Planning Division, and I'm here tonight to go over the first set of code amendments that are proposed to update the Salem UDC. This will be the first in a series of work sessions. Those of you that have been on the commission for a few years, Commissioner Pollock knows she was involved with the UDC back in 2014, and then others have been on long enough where you've been through some of these routine updates that we've had. So this is our 2021 update package, and I'm here tonight to go over the amendments that are part of this first work session. So in terms of a little bit of background for the public, the Unified Development Code is kind of a new thing, and at least in I guess in Salem's code lingo, it was we used to have a zoning code and a subdivision ordinances and all these different elements of the code that were disparate and weren't necessarily linked together well. So we began a process to reorganize our code and to consolidate them into one unified, code. So therefore, the Unified Development Code (UDC). So it's a component of the SRC that establishes the land use and development standards for development in the city. And so, like with any code, it's important to evaluate it as time goes on after it's implemented, to address updates that are needed based on changing issues in the community, concerns that arise, changes in state law, housekeeping revisions that are needed to address things that weren't thought about when the code was originally adopted. So that just keeps it fresh and up to date. So the UDC was adopted in 2014. We've done a series of updates, larger updates. One was done in 2016, another one in 2019, and this is the 2021 package. So tonight we are going to be speaking about, or I'll be presenting about the proposed amendments that we've developed to implement House Bill 2001. So House Bill 2001 was passed by the state legislature in 2019 in an effort to help address the state's housing crisis by requiring cities like Salem, large cities over 25,000 population, to increase the type and diversity of housing types that are allowed in residential areas or residential zoned areas within cities that allow for single family, in an effort to, again, increase diversity of housing types, increase housing supply, and hopefully affordability. And so in doing that, the types of housing that is required to be added to single family zones or residential areas that allow single family uses are kind of middle housing types, which are kind of somewhat more traditional, that kind of maybe not we've seen a lot developed, over the recent history, but we're trying to get, more, in our neighborhoods. And that includes townhouses, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and then cottage clusters. So in order, to implement the requirements of House Bill 2001, we looked at, the various chapters of the code, and there's, a handful that are impacted. The ones that where the biggest changes occur are in our residential zones that are primarily single family oriented, and those include the residential agriculture, or the RA zone, the RS zone, the single family residential zone, the RD zone, which is the duplex residential zone, and also the RM1 multifamily residential zone, which is our lower density multifamily zone. In addition to those zones, we've had to establish some new definitions for the various types of housing types that are called for in order to implement House Bill 2001. And then we're amending the zones to allow, these new middle housing types that are required to be, allowed. We're changing, some of the lot, the lot sizes is a bigger change to the development standards. There are some lot dimension standard, changes that are proposed with this, but not very many. Most of our lot standards will kind of remain the same and will be consistent with what's allowed for single family. There's some changes to setbacks that are proposed, with this set of amendments. Some changes of getting rid of a requirement back that was adopted in 2008 to have a garage when you build a new dwelling in an RA, RS, or RD zone. We've established a whole section that establishes special standards for cottage cluster housing, which is a housing type that we're required to allow under the House bill. And we've tweaked the standards for townhouses and 3 and 4 family uses under Chapter 700. We're also, making some changes to the parking requirements and PUDs and generally, for 2 family uses and townhouses, in general. And then also we have some changes for parking dealing with conversions of existing single family homes to duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. So in terms to kind of starting off at the beginning, so definition, so it's important to understand what we're talking about here. And so some of these definitions already exist in our code, like we have a definition for townhouse and duplex, but we do have some new ones here like cottage cluster. So basically, the housing types we're looking at here are, one, a townhouse, and that's an individual unit on its own lot, but it's attached at the common property line by a wall. And so that type of housing would fall under our use classification of a single family use under Chapter 400. A duplex, on the other hand, is 2 attached dwelling units on an individual lot. They don't have a lot line between them. There are 2 units on one lot, and they share either a common wall or a common floor. and ceiling. That type of use under our use classification chapter would be considered a two-family use. And two-family is any use that where there are two dwelling units on a lot, be it a duplex where they're attached or two separate dwelling units where they're detached. So you could have either attached or detached product, as a two-family use, and duplex is a type of that two-family use. Triplex is a building where there are three units that are attached and share common walls and or floors and ceilings. That is a three-family use under our use classification system. Quadplex is a building that contains four attached units on a lot, and that is a four-family use under our use classification system. And then finally, we have cottage cluster, and that is a grouping of 5 to 12 detached dwelling units, each with a maximum building footprint of 900 square feet. That are located on an individual lot and include a common courtyard. And so under our use classification system, because cottage clusters can have 5 to 12 dwelling units, that type of housing would be considered a multiple family use under Chapter 400. So, so the first set of changes that we're looking at in order to implement House Bill 2001 in our single-family residential zones and that RM1 zone deal with what's allowed. So, so I have a table here that shows the different zones that are affected by the amendments, and then the types of housing that are currently allowed, and then the proposed changes under House Bill 2001. So we'll start off in the RA and RS zone. So today in the RA and RS zone, as a special use, you can have a townhouse that has up to 3 units that are attached in a row. You can also have a duplex, but it's limited on where you can have a duplex to being on a corner lot that's 7,000 square feet or greater. And then you can also have two-family shared housing within the RA and RS zones, and that is the type of housing essentially where the dwelling was constructed as a single-family dwelling unit, and then later, converted, to a two dwelling units where two families live within it. So under the proposed changes, in order to allow the greater diversity of housing types in the RA and RS zones, we are proposing we will still allow townhouses. There will still be a special use, but instead of only allowing 3 attached dwelling units on their own lots in a row, we're bumping that up by 1 to allow a maximum of 4 attached units, constructed in a row. We will allow all two-family, not just a duplex on a corner lot of 7,000. So we will allow all two-family regardless of that 7,000 lot size and its corner lot location. And I will point out that it's not just allowing a duplex attached units; it's all two-family. So we would allow a two individual dwelling units on one lot, or 2 attached dwelling units on a lot vis-a-vis a duplex. And then we're also allowing 3-family, 4-family, and cottage clusters as a special use in the RA and RS zones. And then again, like 2-family, 3-family would include either a triplex where all the units are attached, detached units, up to 3, and the same thing with 4-family, a quadplex of 4 attached, or 4 detached units, or a combination thereof. So that's, kind of a change to the uses that are allowed in the RA and RS. In terms of the RD zone, it also allows townhouses subject to the same special use standard of a maximum of 3 attached in a row. And because it's a duplex zone, it already allows 2-family. So in terms of the changes that need to be made to the RD zone, we are doing the same, bump up of townhouses from 3 to 4, being able to be attached in a row. And then we are adding 3-family, 4-family, and cottage cluster as a special use, similar to what we're proposing in the RA and RS. And again, because 2-family is already allowed in the RD zone, there's no need to establish that as an additional allowed use. And then finally, in the RM1 zone, it's a zone that's a multifamily zone. It's, like I mentioned earlier, it's our lesser density multifamily zone, and it already allows essentially, the diversity of housing types, that are called for in House Bill 2001. It allows townhouses, it allows duplexes, 3-family, 4-family, and multifamily. The only thing we really need to change here is that cottage cluster is a type of multifamily that's really kind of a term of art, and it's not subject to the same multifamily standards that you would otherwise have for a multifamily development of 5 to 12 units. So when you look at the RM1 zone, you'll see that in the multifamily category, you will see that cottage cluster is allowed as a special use, and then all other multifamily in the RM1 zone is just allowed as a permitted use as it is currently today. In terms of the next set of changes to the zones, we also have to look at lot area requirements. And this is where kind of I guess the biggest probably change to the development standards probably comes about. And so, and it really focuses on the RA, RS, and RD zones, where primarily the only uses that are allowed are single family on 4,000 square foot lots, and very limited duplex allowance, at least in the RA and RS, on corner lots that are 7,000. We didn't have to make any changes to the RM1 zone because it already allows townhouses at a minimum lot size of 1,500 square feet, and 2-family, 3-family, and 4-family, and multifamily vis-a-vis cottage cluster already would have a lot size minimum of 4,000 square feet, which is today already less than the minimum that would be required by House Bill 2001. So it's less restrictive in the multifamily zone, for lot size, and that makes sense. So we didn't need to change the RM1 zone in that respect. But in terms of the lot size requirements in the RA and RS and RD zones, today, if you look at the lot size requirement for a townhouse, you'll see that it's 4,000 square feet, which is really not practical for townhouses because, townhouses tend to be constructed on narrow, kind of deep lots. And, 4,000, is not a typical, size when you look at other codes that, the jurisdictions have for townhouses. We have a 1,500 square foot townhouse size in our RM1 and RM2 zones. So we're proposing to reduce the minimum lot size for townhouses from 4,000 to 1,500 square feet. And that would apply, in all across the RA, RS, and RD zones equally. In terms of 2-family, today, again, if you're in the RD zone, it's 7,000, or if you're in the RS zone, it's 7,000 and only on a corner. We are changing that, to go down to 4,000, and that's because House Bill 2001 requires us, to allow on any lot within a residential area that allows single family, we have to allow a duplex, on essentially the same way we would a single family home. So our minimum lot size for single family homes is 4,000. So therefore, the minimum proposed lot size for 2-family will be, 4,000 as well in the RA, RS, and RD zones. And then finally, we had to add, lot size standards, minimum lot size standards, for 3-family, 4-family, and cottage clusters, because those uses aren't allowed in the zones today. So we had no, standard that applies to them. So in terms of the proposed amendment, we're recommending 5,000 square foot minimum lot size for 3-family uses and a 7,000 square foot minimum lot size for cottage cluster and 4-family uses. Moving on to the next set of standards in the zones, those pertain to lot dimension standards. And as I mentioned, we didn't have to make as many changes to this because our lot standards in our zones today are generally pretty consistent in terms of width. There's some issues where there's some depth differences, slight depth differences depending on the type of use. So we did have to make a few changes. I guess the main change is we had to address an issue with townhouse lots because in the RA, RS, and RD zone, the minimum lot width requirement for a townhouse is 40 feet wide. And so when you think about townhouses, again, they're generally narrow lots. And, so a lot width of 40 feet wide, essentially with a townhouse, if you're in the middle, you're, 40 feet wide from side to side, and then long, for the depth of the building. And you just don't see, 40 foot wide, townhouse, developments. The width of the lot, is less, and what you lose for kind of width, you kind of gain in depth and height. So in the RA, RS, and RD zones, we're proposing to drop the minimum lot width from 40 feet for townhouses down to 20. And that's consistent with what we have in the RM1 and RM2 zones. So it'll be consistent across the board. And then also we have an issue with maximum lot depth. So the maximum lot depth is today in the code is based on, for pretty much all uses, all residential uses, is based on the width of the lot. So if you have a minimum lot width of a townhouse of 20 feet, and then you have a maximum width of 3 times, or a maximum depth of 3 times the width, that results in a situation, 3 times 20, a maximum lot depth of 60 feet for a townhouse that is, conflicts with the minimum 70-foot depth. So we've proposed to eliminate, the maximum lot depth for townhouses because we don't really feel that there is a big need for a maximum lot depth. We feel that, the width is important, the area is important, and if the lots, are deeper, there's really not a concern to have, necessarily a maximum lot with lot depth established. For two-family uses, that nothing is changing. It's still the minimum width of a lot is 40 feet wide. The minimum depth is 70 feet deep, and then the width maximum is 3 times the width. That's remaining the same, which is the same as for single family. And for 3-family, 4-family, and cottage clusters, the width we're having to establish a width first of all, because again, these were uses that aren't currently allowed, in the RA and RS and RD zones. But the depth that that is being ascribed to these types of housing is 40 feet wide, which is consistent with the minimum lot width for single family and 2-family in the zones. But the depth is just slightly deeper at 80 feet as a minimum, as opposed to 70. And the width remains the depth maximum equals still 3 times the width. And then in the RM1 zone, the only thing we had to change was the maximum lot depth for townhouses, because it is currently, again, limited to the 3 times the width, and that creates a problem. So no max for townhouse lots in the RM1 zone, which is consistent with the other RA, RS, and RD zones. Then there are also some changes to density requirements. Again, not many. Wherever there was a density requirement in the residential zones, we had to look at that. And so in the RA and RS and RD zones, there isn't a density requirement. It's just a lot size, standard, and then what type of units are allowed, be it, single family, 2-family, 3-family, and 4-family. But House Bill 2001 does specifically establish, a density standard for cottage, clusters. So we've incorporated that into the code, and that's in the multifamily zone, RM1, where we have a density standard. It's a minimum of 4 dwelling units per acre, and then no max for cottage clusters in terms of density. We also have density requirements in PUDs, or planned unit developments. And in PUDs today, it's important to remember that, a PUD is not intended to really give a density bonus, over what could be achieved if you just did a normal subdivision. It's just intended to provide a way to, have alternative, more flexible siting standards, such as clustering units to preserve open space. But it's not intended to give, an increased density bonus over what could otherwise be done, through a normal subdivision. So today in the RA, RS, and RD zones, you determine how many units are allowed in a PUD by taking the area of the site, subtracting out the area of the development that will be utilized for roads and private driveways and flag lot access ways, and then taking that net area and then dividing it by the minimum lot size requirement for a single family dwelling. And what that gives you is the number of units that would be allowed in that development. So to make things simpler and more kind of uniform, with this set of amendments, but also to ensure that the density that you could have in a PUD is generally the same as what you could have if you didn't do a PUD. We used a methodology which is similar to what we currently do, but it's more standardized, and it's just now a flat density. So in order to get to the 20 dwelling units per acre max, we took an acre. We then used a rule of thumb calculation for how much land is typically devoted to roads and access. That's 20%. So then you take the 20% of the acre, subtract that out, and you get your net area. And then instead of dividing by 4,000, and then assuming 1 dwelling unit on a 4,000 square foot lot, we divided by 7,000. And then took that number and multiplied by 4, because in the RS zone now you can have 7,000 under this amendment. You'll be able to have a subdivision which could have 7,000 square foot lots with 4 units on them. So that's where we got to the 20 dwelling units per acre. So the 20 units per acre is the equivalent kind of maximum density that you could achieve in a PUD, as compared to like if you did a quadplex subdivision in a single family residential zone without a PUD. So 20 dwelling units per acre is a new density proposed there in a PUD for RA and RS and RD. And then finally, we tweaked the density requirements in the RM1 zone to bump up the maximum density for townhouses from 14 dwelling units per acre max to 25 dwelling units per acre max. And that is based on the requirements of House Bill 2001. If you're going to apply density to townhouses, the maximum has to be 25. And then we also are proposing no density maximum for 2-family, 3-family, and 4-family, because under House Bill 2001, it says we cannot apply a maximum density to 3-family and 4-family uses. And so we kept it consistent and added 2-family in there as well. So no maximum density for 2-family, 3-family, or 4-family uses. There were just a few changes to setbacks, that are proposed in the zones. Again, the general underlying, the general setbacks of the zones remain the same. And kind of the key principle in these amendments is whatever we do for middle housing, vis-a-vis, 2-family, 3-family, 4-family, we have to generally be consistent with what we're requiring for, single family uses in the same zone. So in terms of, the RA, RS, and RD zones and the RM1 zone, the setbacks abutting a street, the setbacks on the interior sides and the setbacks, in the rear, they're all going to remain the same. So along streets, it's minimum 12 feet. On a local street, minimum 20 feet. On an arterial collector, the setbacks on the side property lines are 5, and then for new, and then the setback in the rear is 14 or 20, depending on if it's a single story structure, which is a 14-foot minimum setback, or a 2-story or more structure, which is a 20-foot setback. So those setbacks are going to generally remain the same and will apply to 2-family, 3-family, and 4-family in the RA, RS, and RD zones as they apply to single-family dwellings today. With the one thing we did have to change, though, are the setbacks related to cottage clusters, and this is because cottage clusters have specific standards that apply to them under House Bill 2001, and there's setbacks that are different than what you would typically see in the zones today. And so I'll talk about those in a bit. I have a graphic to kind of show those. But a bigger change is a change that was required by the state, and it's unique to Salem because Salem does not have a comprehensive plan and land use code that has been acknowledged to comply with Goal 5, which is the natural resources provisions and or goals of the statewide planning program. So in the adoption of these these proposed rules for middle housing, we have a 100-foot setback that now applies from the top of bank on both sides, of mapped waterways. And so, we have this new 100-foot setback requirement, that's intended to not, to further degrade the waterway. And again, it's because, we're not fully acknowledged for Goal 5 compliance by the state. So we have this 100-foot setback we have to, apply now. And it only applies to new middle housing, and middle housing and new PUDs. It does not apply to single family. Single family will, remain as it is today. And in order to ensure, because when you look at the 100-foot setback requirement and then how it applies to lots out there, there are instances where we have plan unit developments that have been approved, back like in 2008, that have, for various reasons, not yet had, townhomes or dwelling units constructed on them. So, and they might have a waterway that goes through them. And, where in the past, the waterway protections were established in Chapter 808, which is a tree preservation ordinance. And under that chapter, we require a riparian corridor along both sides of a waterway from the top of bank. And that riparian corridor is 50 feet generally, except along the Willamette River, it's 75 feet on both sides of the waterway. But it's the riparian corridor, it's not a setback per se. It's an area where if there are trees or native vegetation within that 50-foot or 75-foot area from the top of bank, you cannot remove, trees or native vegetation within that area. But if there aren't any native trees or native vegetation within that riparian corridor area, you can be within the 75-foot or 50-foot riparian corridor. You just have to, then otherwise, comply with all this, the setback requirements and any easement requirements that are applicable, and otherwise applicable in the zone. But the setback is a little bit different. It just says 100 feet. So in order to make sure that, we don't have issues where there are platted lots out there that have not been developed and there is going to be new middle housing on them, and especially in PUDs, that's where that would mainly apply at this point. If you have a PUD that was approved prior to this, and you look at the 100-foot setback and it wipes out 5 lots that you can't build on anymore because those townhouse lots are within the 100-foot setback area. we have a provision in the code that says, you know, the waterway setback doesn't apply to existing PUDs. It applies to new PUDs that were adopted after the effective date of the ordinance. And similarly for, you know, platted lots outside of PUDs in the RA, RS, and RD zones, if you are, you know, going to develop any middle housing, you know, meaning a townhouse, a 2-family use, a 3-family use, 4-family use, or a cottage cluster, you know, as a new use, those, you know, you have to meet the new setback requirements. But if it's an existing, you know, middle housing type that already exists on a lot, you can rebuild that existing, you know, middle housing type, you know, that middle housing building in its existing location within its footprint. So it helps to, you know, minimize, you know, any challenges we could have over like taking a property because, you know, you can't develop anything on it because of this new increased setback. So those are kind of the setback changes. And then, you know, so cottage cluster is a big portion of kind of what we're now going to allow in residential zones. And there are standards that we've included in they're kind of split between 2 areas. The cottage cluster standards are included in the zones themselves, and then there's also a set of additional specific, you know, cottage cluster standards that are included in Chapter 700, which is our special use chapter. And Chapter 700 is really intended, you know, for, you know, the place for standards that apply to specific to a use that don't generally apply, you know, in a zone. And so when you look at the zones, you'll see like in the RA, RS, and RD, you'll see that like for setbacks and lot coverage and height, that, you know, you'll see a reference to multifamily, you know, in the development standards tables for setbacks, height, and lot coverage, et cetera. What that is referring to is cottage clusters, because cottage cluster is a type of multifamily housing. So when you look at the zones, you'll see that there are setbacks established for cottage clusters in the zones, height, you know, established for cottage clusters, you know, in the zones. But then where there are unique standards that you typically don't see in the zones themselves that are really unique to cottage clusters, those are going to be the standards in Chapter, you know, 700 under 700.011. And then to kind of go over an overview of the standards that are proposed for cottage housing based on the requirements of House Bill 2001, there is a maximum, you know, building footprint for each cottage of 900 square feet. So that's, you know, the footprint itself. You know, they could be more than 1 story tall. So it's not like 900 square feet total size. It's the footprint, 900 square feet. The maximum height of, you know, the cottages is 25 feet or 2 stories, whichever is greater. There are requirements, you know, for building and accessory structure setbacks. Those are in the zones. There's requirements for, you know, how big the common corridor has to be, you know, its minimum dimension requirements and how it's designed, what it has to include, that type of thing. Requirements for how the cottages are oriented to the common courtyard and to the street. Also standards for pedestrian access that require, you know, connections to be provided, you know, from the main entries of each cottage, you know, to connect them to the courtyard, to parking, and then to the street. And then also we have, you know, location and setback requirements for parking and vehicle use areas that are included in Chapter 700 because they're kind of unique to cottage clusters. There's also the ability to do community buildings within a cottage cluster, and a community building is a building where you know, might be a kitchen or a meeting area or like a banquet hall type of building where, you know, it's a place for, you know, residents to gather, and it serves, you know, that little community. And so if you have a community building, there are community building, you know, standards included, you know, in Chapter 700. And then finally, if you have an existing single family dwelling that you intend to include in the cottage cluster and convert it in the single family dwelling to a cottage cluster, there are standards for how that single family dwelling can be incorporated in and how it's counted towards like the number of units and the size standards for the cottage cluster overall. So in terms of kind of a visual example of the cottage cluster development standards, I have this graphic that was taken from the model code that the state put together. And so you have an alley on the top of the screen, street on the bottom of the screen, and on the left and right, you know, on the graphic, that would be your interior property lines where it abuts, you know, an adjacent, you know, residential development. So in terms of setbacks for the cottages themselves, the cottages have to be set back a minimum of 10 feet from the street, you know, and then also 10 feet, you know, from any rear property line. From the side property lines on the left and right hand side of the images here, it's minimum 5 feet for the cottages, and that's consistent with what we require, you know, for existing, you know, for single family homes in the RS zone today. And one thing to note too is and you'll see throughout, like the requirements for townhouses and, the requirements for setbacks for cottage clusters. If you have when you build a brand new townhouse or a brand new cottage cluster, the side yard setback is 5, and if you build a new single family home on a lot, the setback is 5. But, over time, if you want to add on to that existing single family home, townhouse, or cottage cluster development, we are allowing you to go, to within 3 feet. And the 3 feet, for existing is just to match what we currently allow for existing single family homes, where again, the home was originally built with a 5-foot setback, but as time goes on, somebody wants to add on, make a room a little bit bigger, you can go within 3 feet for an existing single family. So 5 feet for new, 3 feet for existing on the sides. And so that's kind of for the dwellings themselves. And then in terms of parking, there is a requirement that you cannot have, parking areas located, between the dwellings that are closest to the street. So you can't have parking between those dwellings that are closest to the front street. You can put them to the side or to the rear, and if they are to the side, like in this graphic, the minimum setback from the front property line next to a street is 20. If we were to imagine this as a corner lot and this was a street on the left-hand side, it would be a minimum 10-foot setback, for the parking from the side street. Or if this was like a double frontage lot where you had a street in the front, a street in the rear, the parking would also have to be set back 10 feet from the rear. But if it's an interior side property line, as this graphic shows, it is also a 10-foot setback to the abutting residential development for parking lots. There is no setback for parking in vehicle use areas abutting an alley. In terms of driveway standards, like single family homes today, we don't have a setback requirement for driveways from side property lines or rear property lines. So in order to maintain consistency with what we allow for single family, any driveway can be within, there's no setback, from a side yard or a rear yard property line or an alley, for a driveway. Driveways do, however, need to be set back 10 feet, from side streets and 20 feet from front streets. But, where the driveway is directly crossing from the street to get onto the property, it can obviously be, within the required 10 feet or, 20-foot setback area. In addition to the setbacks, there is the requirement for the common courtyard itself. The minimum size required for the common courtyard is 150 square feet per dwelling unit, and with no dimension less than 15. So, horizontal and vertical, nothing can be, less than, 15 feet in dimension, and then 150 square feet per dwelling unit size. And then there's also a requirement for pedestrian access to be provided to link, the dwelling units, the dwelling unit entries, to the street, to each other, to the courtyard, and to parking. So it kind of just creates a nice network of pedestrian connectivity to serve the cottages. And then in addition to the special use standards, the new ones being created for cottage clusters in 700, we are modifying, slightly, the existing, special use standards under 700 for townhouses and 3 and 4 family uses. So the townhouse standards have been in place. The townhouse special use standards have been in place for years and years and years. As I mentioned previously, today it allows, in an RS, RA, and an RD zone up to 3 townhouses to be attached in a row. We're changing that special use standard to bump it up to 4 instead of 3. And then, like I mentioned, for cottage clusters and existing single family homes, you can go within 3 feet if you want to add on, after it's originally built at some time. So we're saying that, so when you think about townhouses, they're constructed in a row, so that the units on the end of the row where they're not attached to another dwelling unit, their interior side setback would typically be 5 for new, but we're also saying, 5 for new, but you can also reduce that down to 3 with an addition later on if you wanted to. So 5 for new, 3 for existing for townhouses, and that applies to kind of the end units on the row of units. And then for 3 and 4 family uses, Eunice had, worked on, well, it's the city, but Eunice had worked on, as you know, the multifamily standards for revising multifamily standards to make it easier to do multifamily in the city. And so we'd established, 3 and 4 family, use standards in Chapter 700 with that, when we separated out 3 and 4 family from multifamily and made them a special use. But with House Bill 2001, we have to make some further tweaks to those, standards. And so the standards that are proposed, deal with how the entries of the units are oriented to the street, or how they're oriented on the lot. And so essentially, the House bill requires that, the units have to, face a street, or that at least one main entrance of every building on the lot has to face a street, or can be within a 45-foot angle from the street. So essentially, we want it to face the street, or be, looking towards the street, or they can face an open space area that is adjacent to the street, or the entry can open on to a porch. And then the other standard that, requires that if you have, garages and off-street surface parking areas, that those areas can't be between the dwelling unit and the street, with some limited exceptions. So you can have parking areas located between a dwelling unit and the street. One, if there is another dwelling that is closer to the street than the garage, or the garage or parking area. So essentially, you might have a garage or parking area that's set back further on the lot, and you have another dwelling unit, though, however, that's closer to the street, and it's between the parking area and the street. Well, then you can have the parking between the back unit and the street. And then the other situation is if you look at the total width of the garages and surface parking areas and maneuvering areas, if you add those up and then you compare it to the frontage of the lot, if the amount of the width of the garages and the driveways and parking areas is less than 50% of the frontage of the lot, then you can have the parking areas between the dwelling units and the street. And the idea behind that is that we don't want the full frontage of a lot to look like a parking lot, essentially. So get some flexibility to allow that, but you can only have up to 50% of the lot frontage. And then finally, there are some slight changes to the off-street parking requirements. Today, based on the multifamily amendments that were adopted in the recent past, we already did a lot of work changing the requirements for 3 family and 4 family. It's already 1 space per dwelling unit, and so we already have that in place. It's consistent with House Bill 2001. But we do need to make some changes to the parking requirement for townhouses and 2 family uses. That's being reduced from a minimum of 2 spaces per dwelling unit today to a proposed minimum of 1 space per dwelling unit. We're also establishing, well, it's already in the code that if you have multifamily of 5 to 12 units, it's a minimum of 1 space per dwelling unit. So essentially, it's already there, but cottage clusters, the 1 space per dwelling unit standard will apply, to that as well, because it's a multifamily development of 5 to 12 units, 1 space per dwelling unit for them. And then there's also a provision in the House bill that provides an incentive, for people to convert, and makes it easier to convert existing single-family detached dwellings. So if you are going to take an existing single-family detached dwelling and convert it to a duplex, triplex, or quadplex, the House bill says that the jurisdiction can't require any additional parking for that conversion, regardless of the number of spaces that are currently there. So it's kind of an incentive to allow people to convert an existing single-family detached dwelling to this middle housing type. Now, one thing I would, when staff was working on these amendments that we discussed, and is if you remember, we're not just allowing, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. We are proposing to allow, the broader use category of 2 family, 3 family, and 4 family. And that's because, if we just allow duplex, triplex, and quadplex, in residential areas, it kind of forces, maybe bigger buildings. And then, maybe somebody doesn't want to do 4 attached units where, they could have a single family home on a lot, add 3 units, detached units to the lot, make it a 4 family use. And that 4 family, smaller arrangement of essentially cottages, may be more appropriate to the scale and appearance of the neighborhood than one bigger quadplex building with all the units attached. So, with the understanding that we're allowing 2 family, 3 family, 4 family uses in general, and not necessarily just duplex, triplex, and quadplex, staff feels that it's kind of somewhat of a I don't know, somewhat of a contradiction in that, by saying you don't need to worry about providing additional parking for the attached types of housing. It's kind of a disincentive to like maybe do, additional units that may be more fitting with the character of the neighborhood. And so therefore, I guess the question that we'd like the Planning Commission to consider is if the House bill doesn't allow us to require additional parking, for single family homes converted to a duplex, triplex, or quadplex, is it appropriate for Salem to also say that if you have an existing single family home and you want to add, 3 units to the lot and make it a 3-family use, that similarly, you wouldn't have to provide additional parking, for that either. So that's something we'd be looking to kind of get the Planning Commission's input on. And then finally, we have a requirement in the RA, RS, and RD zones that was established back in 2008 when the city was doing the set of infill development standards that established, the definition for what a flag lot is, and the 5,500 square foot minimum lot size for flag lots and partitions. So quite some time ago, we had that was implemented, and along with that, we added a requirement that for any new dwelling constructed in the RA, RS, and RD zone, and by new dwelling meaning a single family home or duplex, you had to have a garage, with it that was constructed of like materials and had similar appearance to the main dwelling. So, based on everything that is changing, the direction, House Bill 2001, the vision, where we're going with our Salem, we feel that it's maybe more appropriate to let the market dictate, how the parking is provided. And, does it need to be in a garage? Maybe it could be in an area, in a side yard or rear yard that's screened in a surface area. So, we're proposing to remove the requirement that new dwellings, constructed in the RA, RS, and RD zone have to have a garage. So that wraps up my presentation. So I would open it up to discussion. And will also note that we had, there were, hopefully you've received, comments, there were 5 comments that were received from individuals, and those are in your packet. And if you have, questions about those, concerns raised, I'd be happy to answer those.
Yeah, and we also received a letter from the Thousand Friends of Oregon too later this afternoon. So if you have questions about that, and then also any comments about Bryce's last question of the commissioners on whether or not we want it to be consistent and not require that parking for single family when you're adding units to that single family dwelling. So Commissioner Slater, I've got you up first.
I can't believe I got the first spot.
I can't either.
So Bryce, the main question I have in all of this very dizzying details is what are the open space requirements for each unit? By open space, I think right now there's a certain amount that you can cover on a residential lot. I think it's like 55% of the lot can be covered and the 45% has to be open. Do we have something like that, or do we have a table like that now that we could look at, or that you could send around?
Yeah, let me see if I can bring that up, and I could bring up the RS zone as an example here. So just give me a second. And yeah, we do maintain lot coverage requirements. And so let me start sharing here. And so hopefully, let me zoom in. I know it's really tiny. And close your eyes if you have motion sickness. I'm gonna zoom down a little bit here real quick to get to our lot coverage, section of the code. Can everybody see that okay? Do I need to zoom in more? Probably need to zoom in more, huh?
It's very clear.
It's
Okay.
also was in the packet, right, Bryce? So this is page 42 of the PDF that was sent out. So if you want to look at it on your
Yes, yeah,
computer.
very true. Yep, very true. And so yeah, I'm page 42 of the PDF, the packet, and this is in the RS zone. And so for lot coverage requirements, today it's 60% for single family, and that is not changing. What we've done is we've added 2 family. Well, today for single family and 2 family, it's max 60. We've added 3 family and 4 family, so we're treating them all consistently with how we treat single family. And then we added multifamily specifically, and this is one of those references that I was talking about when you see multifamily in an RS zone. What are you talking about? Well, the only multifamily use that's allowed and that's going to be allowed in the RS zone is cottage cluster. So when you see multifamily in these zones, it's meaning cottage cluster, and then the no max is based on a a requirement from House Bill 2001. And but there's a requirement to have the common courtyard in the middle. So you'll get open space with the cottage cluster, based on those standards for cottage clusters in 700. But other than that, if it's just like a 2-family, a duplex, a 3-plex, or a quadplex, it's the 60% lot coverage and then the setback requirements that are going to be applicable to the structures. That's how you'll get to open space.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Commissioner Pollock.
Thank you. Great presentation. Phew, that was a lot to cover. Getting to your question about the no parking for the detached in a remodeled single residential house. How is that different from the cottage clusters where there is parking required?
Cottage cluster is 5 to 12, so there's a difference in the number of units, but that's a good point. So you could have 4 detached units on a lot and have it be 4 family. So that would be that's a good question. Yeah, would we want to extend that exception to cottage clusters, or just
well, let me say that now. Cottage clusters start from 5 to 12. Is that?
Yeah, it's 5 to 12. That's the range.
Okay, but if you do the single family one and limit it up to 4, then maybe I can live with the no parking for the 4. But if it's more 5, then maybe that's when it kicks in.
Yeah, and so if you look at the language, yeah, it's in chapter 806. Let me get down to there, and it is on. Let's see. Sorry.
Everybody's looking away.
So it's on page of chapter 806, 96 of the PDF, but it's on page 3 of the chapter 806, which is the off-street parking chapter. So the minimums, the general minimum requirement for a 2-family, 3-family, 4-family is going to be 1 space per dwelling unit. But then if you jump, back up just a couple pages above where we talk about how the parking requirements of the chapter apply to development, we have this section that talks about applicability to single-family detached dwellings converted to duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes.
Mhm.
So Commissioner Pollock, right now, this would only apply to if you're taking a single-family home and turning it into a duplex, triplex, or quadplex. It wouldn't apply to the 5 or more. Wouldn't.
Okay.
Because it's limited to the maximum number of units would be 4.
So that's the distincting characteristics where, yeah, okay, I can totally see that.
Yeah, I can. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and can I just do a little question?
You can do another one.
Oh, okay. So the other question I had was the multi-generational housing, which is not necessarily abutting, but like the bottom floor is because I've had builders talk to me about this before, and it's like they create the bottom floor especially for somebody either in a wheelchair or for somebody to get around easily, the older generation. And it might even be like the top floor is entered on a hill, on the top of the hill, and then the bottom floor, the multi-generation, that's the elderly. Would that be something that we would also cover in this section, based on the Senate bill where you're bringing 2 generations together?
Well, we don't require, not specifically, but that would be, you could have a duplex in that kind of format. You could, it's 2 units, independent units, and they could be, stacked on each other, top and bottom, and we will be allowed, that will be allowed 3-family and 4-family. So by allowing, more than just a single family home on a lot in an RS zone, it does open up, the greater possibility to have, not only, different families living together in a building, but also multi-generational, families, living together in, in a building in 2 separate units. So
it doesn't have to be common wall. It could also be common floor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, based on the definition, if you remember from my presentation, we talked about
Yeah. Oh,
a triplex, meaning a building containing 3 attached dwelling units on an individual lot. Each dwelling unit must share a common wall or common floor/ceiling with at least one other dwelling unit.
oh, great. Okay. Okay. I didn't pick up the floor and ceiling. Thank you.
You bet.
Commissioner Schweikart.
Thank you. This is sort of a broad question. For first, Bryce, can I assume that cottage cluster was the term, and I guess the vague phrasing and definition that was in the House bill? So this is not something that was that we came up with. This criteria, this category.
This
Right.
is totally, there's a whole,
the
in
state
the
bill.
model code,
Okay.
there's a whole set of standards just for cottage clusters.
So can I guess ask the question, because I know that we're not going to get the development community out to provide public comment at our planning commission meeting until we're actually ready to vote on this stuff. They're not going to come out during the work session. So I just want to know, do we see something that could be defined as a cottage cluster in our community currently? Do we see folks wanting to develop something that looks like a cottage cluster right now?
Well, we've had, if you, cottage clusters, exist in the city historically, if you in, kind of the inner areas of town and various areas where you will see, kind of small, little dwelling units arranged on a common courtyard. So they were a historic, form of, housing development that was addressed. But then I think in the more recent years, there has been a development on Fairmont. Eric Olson was the developer of those. It was it was done through a PUD where, they have, a series of individual units on a lot. And I can't recall if there was a land division that was associated with it, but there's a common open space in the middle. And then, I think where you've seen, cottage cluster type of developments, it's been, they've used the PUD as a mechanism to do it. Other than that, I think, multifamily developments are just, they're occurring on larger lots, more units. So it is kind of,
I was interested because I could see this being an opportunity for the more creative use of infill spaces, maybe closer into the city. Because I see, in terms of what I see out here in South Salem right now, are just very large multifamily developments. You don't see a whole lot of small stuff at less than 20 units. And I think that financially, it's hard to pencil something that's smaller for most people. So you'd have to have some unique financing to be able to get something smaller. But it seems and so I just was interested, how are folks coming to you guys at the city saying, I want something that's like a 8 to 10 units, but I'm having some difficulties with the code as it exists now.
I know I've heard comments from architects in town, expressing their willingness to really want to do this missing middle type of cottage cluster housing. I'd maybe ask Eunice, who's been working on this as well, if she's heard from any stakeholders in Salem.
Who's lurking in the background?
I know, sorry. Hi, Eunice Kim, Long Range Planning Manager. I think when we did the multifamily housing design project, we had a lot of people come out and want to create that kind of 5 to 12 category of smaller multifamily. And at the time, we kind of created those standards so you could do a cottage cluster because there was so much interest, but because that's only in the multifamily zones, this would allow it obviously in the single family zones.
Got it.
Would open it up.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Can I have another question?
You sure may.
All right. So I'm already pitching, guys. I'm already in the stage where I'm in the can we talk about some changes here? So here's the one that just struck me as I was reviewing this is in section 700.011, which is the cottage cluster section. I'm looking at my printed copy, so I apologize. It's page 4 of 19 in the section 700.
Got it.
So with respect to the common courtyard, which is C, item 4, I don't know when this happened, but I became somebody that feels strongly about trying to reduce impervious surfaces. And I think that we could lower that total impervious number. Because I think, like, let's not add more runoff into our city sewers, and create more hardship on our city's systems. That you can easily create some sort of like on-site stormwater filtration. You can create, there's so many available permeable surface types out there. So, why not say that the impervious elements cannot exceed 50% of the common courtyard area, 30% of the common courtyard area? I guess I'm here for some permeable pavers. I'm here for some synthetic turf, something like that.
That's a good observation, Commissioner Swikart, because the ones that I've seen north of downtown, they're just quaint, lovely cottage clusters, but their courtyards are all grassed. I mean, it's like something that you want to lay a picnic blanket down on and have dinner.
And I get that grass, so from the owner's perspective, grass can sometimes be costly to maintain. And so from a maintenance perspective, that might be less desirable, but there are permeable options out there that maybe aren't completely natural grass, but maybe a combination of some grass spaces and some permeable spaces that add up to, a larger percentage, maybe the majority of the space being permeable. I think we should go that way.
I think that's a great point. I would be in favor of that change too.
If I could just for a second.
Sure, Eunice.
So that 75% comes from the model code, and the state's pretty strict in terms of what you can require, and you can't really be more restrictive than what the state says. So we would have to double back. I mean, we could check because we don't have to apply the model code. We took some standards from the model code, but I just want to say that we did not come up with that 75%, and we can check. But I'm pretty sure we can't do that.
Okay,
thanks.
Cool. Other questions of Bryce from our commission? And I'm not seeing any.
This is Casey. I've got
no hand raised, Commissioner Kopcho.
Hold on. There it is.
There you got it.
I had my real hand up, forgetting that my camera is not working. So
go ahead, Commissioner Kopcho.
Thank you. And thanks, Bryce, as always, for these. There's a lot of work doing all of this. And so to Eunice's probably non-surprise, my question is around setbacks. So I guess based on the last response regarding permeable surfaces, are the setbacks, as I kind of flip through 513 and so on and so forth, do these revised numbers also come from the model code?
The numbers for the setbacks are, consistent with what we require for single family, meaning we, under the bill, we can't be generally more restrictive than what we currently require for single family dwellings.
So if we were less restrictive for single family, then we could be less restrictive for multifamily.
Correct.
Okay. I would just, as I dive down the rabbit hole of planning and traditional, specifically traditional development patterns, setbacks just occur as more and more problematic. And the reason why is it just becomes an arbitrary use of land when land is scarce. We can't create more land. And so if we were to do the math on the total amount of land that we currently use just because we require it to be used for setbacks in the city, I would probably be astonished by whatever that number is. And so I want to, as far as we can, move to making the best use of the space that we have and using them for places. So designating like where we can use land for places and non-places. Setbacks and required landscaping and things like that is a non-place. It's something that will produce no economic benefit for the city. And so to the extent possible that we could move in a direction to reduce some of these, whether it's abutting streets or interior, I would certainly entertain it. I'm not ready to put anything forward as far as change today, but that's just where my mind is at predominantly. And then with the building heights, I didn't notice in your presentation, but could you run back through for me whether or not we increased any for the RM 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, let me look at show the RS as the single family as an example. So
Great.
in terms of height, let me get back through this. So the only thing we changed was the heights for cottage clusters. So like we had for lot coverage and everything. So we had in the RS zone today a maximum height for single family and 2 family at 35 feet. We've added 3 family and 4 family to that. So it's 35 feet, consistent with what we require for a single family dwelling. Multifamily, on the other hand, we carved that out, as a specific change, for difference for cottage clusters, and that's maximum 25 feet or 2 stories, whichever is greater. And then if you're going the 2 stories, whichever is greater route, you still can't, the 2-story cottage can't exceed 35 feet.
Okay.
As a limitation.
Gotcha. And you reminded, when you brought up cottage cluster, it reminded me of another good example, the United Way purchase to put up cottage clusters that just went through City Council a week ago. If Commissioner Schweikart wants to spend 3 hours to watch last week's City Council meeting for another example of where a cottage cluster might be. The other question I had, thank you, Bryce, is on parking, and this is another topic that's come up multiple times. It came up in the last UDC revision, where I think Commissioner Pollock put forward the motion for the 25% reduction near the core network, the Chariot's core network. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my willingness to work with the Commission to eliminate parking requirements just generally, because as Bryce pointed out in his initial presentation, the market's going to, no one's going to build a multifamily with no parking or other development with no parking, unless they want to lose money.
So maybe I should have maybe talked about this a little bit more in my presentation. So even, so when we're talking about 3 family and 4 family, we still have, the provision of none if you're in the downtown core, Central Salem Development Program, CSTP area, or within a quarter mile of the core network. So even though it's 1 dwelling, 1 per unit for 3 family and 4 family, again, if you're within a quarter mile of the Chariot's core network or in the downtown, essentially, it's none. And the same thing is applicable to, single family, within the CSTP area. Actually, we don't have the core network for that one, so it is just 1 in the CSTP for single family, and then 1 for townhouses. And then for 2 family, though, it's just 1 per dwelling unit. So, and yeah, so 3 and 4 family, we do have the reduction to none, for within the core or within a quarter mile of transit.
Did you have a follow-up or another question, Commissioner Copto?
No, I'm just kind of generally making my sentiment known while asking clarifying questions. So I appreciate Bryce. Thank you.
And so for counterpoint, I think Commissioner Slater has a comment, and I betcha it has to do with the setbacks.
You're absolutely right. It pains me to contradict my good friend Commissioner Copcho here. But I have to profoundly disagree with his assessment as setbacks as having no value to the city. Setbacks, of course, are the green spaces in people's homes, right? It's the place where we plant trees, pollinator plants, where kids go out and play. Our current standard of 10 on the front and 20 in the back, to me, seems modest but reasonable in a city that is growing and needs to create more housing opportunities for people. I think when we get below 10 feet on a residential dwelling, whether it's a 1 or 4 person, 4 family dwelling, we really lose any opportunity to create any sort of amenable space. And we have to recognize that the space is not just an individual person space, 1 family space. It is the community public portion of the street front. And we all know how important these days the street front is to encourage pedestrians to walk. If we want to incentivize people to move from cars to pedestrians to bikes, we need to create that street front that is amenable and inviting to people. And without that front setback, we don't have that opportunity at all. It will also severely limit our ability to reduce greenhouse gases by increasing our urban canopy. So I just think that characterization maybe was not as well thought through as so many of Commissioner Kopcha's other statements.
That's fabulous.
Hold on, can I respond, please?
Well, yes, you may.
Only because I take a mild offense. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Commissioner Slater. I agree. I don't think it has no value. My point was limited economic value. So if we're not using that space for buildings to increase the economic benefit of the city, but I will fully admit that there's benefit. That said, just setting aside land that can be a beautiful garden or patio or green space can also just as well lead to a barren expanse of grass or dirt that's not maintained or used by whoever owns that property. And so arbitrarily just designating a setback because that's what we do doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be what it's used for. Conversely, if we prioritize the efficient use of space for development, whether it's a multifamily or mixed use, whether it's a business or an apartment or a single family house, then we will have more space left over to consolidate and build out our, we've talked about the new parks map earlier. We'll have more overall consolidated space. So rather than taking 1/16 of every lot and dedicating that to setbacks, if we aggregate all of those 1/16 up together, then we'll have more space to build out more green spaces that the entire community could go and walk through and enjoy in our new 15-minute walkable neighborhoods that we'll have down the line. And so that's I'm long-term thinking. That would be the ideal scenario for me. But I do agree that it's maybe a pipe dream.
So since we're on this, Commissioner Pollack, is it okay if I go to Commissioner Slater first? Because I think he wants to almost rebut. Is that okay with you? Okay, Commissioner Slater.
Well, I'm going to invite Commissioner Kopcha out to a drink rather than spend too much time on this. But again, I'll just make 2 points, and that is Commissioner Kopcha is ignoring the economic benefits of green space in terms of public health. Once we factor in the public health requirements of green space, everything from mental health benefits, the physical health benefits, I think we'd see an economic benefit to those spaces. It's just not how we currently think about it in the development world. And second of all, if we take all of our green space and aggregate it into simple spots and leave barren developed concrete in between, that's going to have a significant impact on our heat island effect and make this a very uncomfortable space and disincentivize people from getting out on the streets, which is exactly what we're trying to do with so much of our other planning work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Slater. Commissioner Pollack.
Okay, so I don't want to add to any fuel to the fire, but I'm going to have to get onto, I live on a corner, and a lot of my property is dedicated to setbacks. But the thing is we work really hard on our grass and our maple trees. And I'm going to tell you that for whatever reason, the neighborhoods, when they walk, they stop and they're walking and they like lying on our grass and playing around with the dog. And there's a gentleman who's in his wheelchair and he loves the canopy that's created by the tree that was in our front corner and in the front corner of the greenway. And he stops there, and as people walk by, they talk, and it's just become. And then of course the skateboarders, that's kind of like the end of two hills, and it just become like a community hangout to what I don't really care about, but that's where it's come. But again, that if we didn't have those setbacks, that wouldn't be true. And it's kind of nice to see that everybody of different he walks like a young man and his dog, a guy in a wheelchair, the skateboarders, and these are all people coming together as a community and really enjoying my setback. So I gotta say that part of smart growth is, in fact, getting walkable neighborhoods. And if you're gonna have areas of setback that is inviting, that's part of the smart growth. Is the physicalness of getting people to walk and bike and not drive their cars and enjoy the area they live. And then that's just what my little comment there about what was discussion. But I also wanted to talk about this 1,000 Friends of Oregon and their things about density bonuses. Are we going to have Eunice did send me an email about there is a bill, Senate Bill 8 that's going through, that's going to that she thinks might pass. So are we going to have an affordable housing section in the UDC? That's my question. That will have all the tools and everything that we can deal with everything.
Eunice, did you want to address that? And like as part of our Salem, because it wouldn't be part of this. It wouldn't be part of this code update package, but maybe as part of the broader look. And I have to ask for Eunice to provide some input.
Yeah, so we are looking into some additional incentives for affordable housing as part of following the last zoning subcommittee meeting we had, and we're looking into the California kind of model that Commissioner Schweikart had brought up. Kind of where those incentives land, if it's in one part of the chapter or another, I don't know that we've gotten that far yet, but we are considering some additional incentives. In addition to that, House Bill 2001 does require us to look at specific incentives like a construction excise tax and SDCs. And so that is another package of ideas that will be coming to the City Council as like the counterpart to this whole House Bill 2001 implementation. So that's happening as well.
So would that be in the affordable housing issue, or that's just in general for what we're doing right now?
Both.
Okay, it's a complicated question, but
it is. Well, it's the House Bill 2001 does actually require us to look at incentivizing middle housing and making it more affordable, and it specifically calls out different tools that we could use to do that. So that will be one section, and then as part of our Salem, we'll look at affordability generally for all housing, which could apply to middle housing.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Capcho, final rebuttal.
Yeah, hey, thanks. I would just note that removing a requirement doesn't mean people aren't going to do it anymore. Just like removing parking requirements, we're still going to build parking. So if folks removed a setback requirement, they could still build that 10-foot area. They could still build whatever they wanted to. But if they wanted to use their property differently, then they would be able to. And then without having to go through the variance process.
Thank you, Commissioner Capcho. Any other questions or comments? And Bryce, have we given you enough direction on that one question that you asked about single family detached?
From the testimony, from the comments from the commissioners that have commented on it, it seems like, there is support for, applying it, because the number of units is limited to 4, it's not
right.
5
not
or more.
5 to 12. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions before you let Bryce go? And I'm not seeing any. That was a great presentation, Bryce. You distilled a pretty complicated conversation.
Well, stay tuned. There'll be more chapters to come on unrelated things to House Bill 2001. So stay tuned. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. So we're going to move on to item 6, our public comment. And I believe that this time, Shelby, we have 3 folks signed up, but I'll check with you at the end. And I'll remind you when you do speak to the commission, if you could state your name and address for the record, and keep in mind you have 3 minutes. And our first person is Phil Carver.
Thank you, staff and commissioners, for the opportunity to comment. I'm representing 350 Salem here, and my address is 1007 Newport Road Southeast, 97306. And I want to indicate that I'm fairly new to this. We generally support 1,000 Friends comments that they submitted. And the overarching concept we have is we'd like to encourage more flexibility in exchange for certain conditions. And one condition might be to maintain 2 trees of some diameter on the property, or providing one of the units be an affordable housing unit, or various other values that the city and the residents have could be allow more flexibility. There seems to be quite a few places where a little more flexibility could be allowed, and generally it seems that the staff, and this is pretty understandable, have not been really creative beyond the requirements of Senate Bill 2001 or House Bill, I can't remember, but anyway, the requirements in state law. And so generally there's some things that I think could use a little more thinking. I don't understand why there's a limit on townhouses per lot, and that's just probably my poor understanding. But it seems to me if you had a really large lot, you should be allowed to have a whole block of townhouses, or 6 or 8 townhouses in a row. I lived in Baltimore for 5 years, and they have 18-foot row houses on a whole block, and people love it. Every night is kind of a sidewalk party. There's no setbacks. So that's a community kind of activity. It is a heat island problem, though. The one thing that's interesting about parking, requiring 1 parking space per dwelling unit, is if that's a frontal driveway in front of the unit, then that frontal driveway takes out a parking place, or at least a big part of a parking place to have a driveway. And so all you're doing is paving over the front of the property to require a frontal driveway to have a parking place. And so it seems kind of self-defeating. So I think more thought could be given into how the parking is provided so that it doesn't wipe out a parking place when you provide a parking place. I support the idea of having the parking applied to all 2, 3, and 4 dwelling units on a lot. And yes, remove the garage requirement for new dwellings. And on setbacks, I think we can be a little more creative, especially on the side setbacks. If 3 or 5 feet is okay sometimes, why isn't it okay all times? I'm a little not really that educated on that. So anyway, we're going to be providing more formal comments through the process. We appreciate all the staff work. It's very complicated, obviously, and we're just learning. So we don't really know what we want, but we think more flexibility and is probably going to be a good thing rather than the current proposed rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carver. Questions of Mr. Carver before we let him go? And I don't see any hands raised. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Moving on to Mr. Easterly. I haven't seen you for a while, Mr. Easterly. If you could state your name and address for the record.
Happily, E.M. Easterly, Ward 8. My concern has been, for the most part, addressed by Mr. Bishop when he went through a fairly positive explanation of why the 100-foot setback along riparian areas is there for anything beyond a single-family dwelling. Makes absolute sense to me. However, when I see a 0 setback for single-family dwellings in a single-family or RA or RS area, I get a little tense. We have in the code chapter 802 that is, I spelled out in one of my written testimony, that provides an opportunity to have something other than 0. I don't need a number, but when the charts are put together, I would urge that the commission, and I don't have my testimony in front of me, so I can't give you page citations, but in each of the charts where they say where there's a 100-foot setback along the waterways for everything but single, then have 0, I would like some notation that would sort of guide the reader to suggest that there really are setbacks within the code of the city of Salem. I'll leave it at that unless there's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Easterly. Looks like Mr. Bryce has a question or a comment to yours.
Yeah, okay, yes, thanks, President Griggs. So yeah, to address EM's concern, I just did want to point out, in the code, we do have, oops, I almost left the meeting. That's not the right button. I wanted to hit. Not share, not leave. So,
too low.
So let me, so if we're looking at the RS zone, for instance, the
Right.
single family residential zone, and we're talking about setbacks, we do have a note under the limitations and qualifications provision, almost there. Okay, so waterway setbacks. So for single family, for instance, so we do say none, but then we say applicable to all other single family, which would mean everything but townhouses. But then we say all other setbacks required abutting streets and interior front, side, and rear property lines still apply.
I thank you. I saw a 0 in the version, none with this additional language makes me a little more comfortable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Easterly. Any other questions of Mr. Easterly? Thank you. Thank you for your time. See you at the courthouse sometime. Exercise courthouse. That's it. Now, next is Mr. Manville, Evan Manville. Name and address, please, for the record, and 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name's Evan Manville. I live at 345 LaFell Street South, and I'm taking a few moments tonight to recommend you completely eliminate the costly parking mandates in this draft. And there are 3 reasons. First, doing so can benefit the person or family who wants to live in the units. 1 in 3 Salem households has just 1 person, and roughly 1 in 6 renter households don't own a vehicle. So if we require every unit to have off-street parking, we're going to force a significant number of people who don't own cars to pay for space they don't use. Now, some households want parking, but we don't require every rental to have a breakfast nook or a bathtub. We shouldn't require every unit to have an off-street parking space. Second, doing so can benefit those who live and travel through the area, so they don't have to experience excess impervious surfaces that we talked about. Might see something like a garden or green space instead. People traveling past don't have to navigate conflicts with cars overhanging the sidewalk. People with disabilities, kids on bikes, parents with strollers don't have to worry about turning traffic across sidewalks or backing up cars. Now, some cars may end up parked on the street, but that can help slow speeding traffic and make it safer for people traveling. So third, it can benefit the city. We're desperately in need of new housing. We need to look to reduce the cost of new housing. Cutting parking mandates can save thousands of dollars from a unit, and it might make the difference between middle housing being feasible or not being feasible to build. So we desperately need that housing, and we need to do everything we can to fight the climate crisis. Not requiring every housing unit to have car storage is a small step, but it's an important step. As Commissioner Kopcho noted, there are those worried that might mean no parking, but the market actually works with parking. When Los Angeles repealed its mandates, it saw an average of 1.2 parking spaces per unit. But it was a diverse set. Some had none, some had offsite, some had lots. And that's kind of what I think should happen in Salem. The housing market is diverse, our households are diverse. The code should allow for that diversity. So thank you for your consideration and your service to the city. I'm amazed at the amount of hours you all put into this, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manville. Do we have questions of Mr. Manville? And I'm not seeing any. And thank you for your time.
Yep.
Take care. Okay, Shelby, did we have anybody else last minute sign up?
Nope, that was it.
Awesome. We'll move on to information reports, of which we have none. And Lisa, I think we're ready for your planning administrator's report.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to start by introducing one of our new planners, Jamie, who attended tonight and hung around to the end because I said I would introduce her. This is Jamie Donaldson. She's one of our new planners. She's a planner 2, and she started in January, moved here from California. I think you guys met Kyle at one of your previous meetings. So those are our 2 new planner 2s that have been here for, I guess, 6 months. 6 months now. Wow, it really flies by this because I never get to see Jamie or Kyle because it's all been a pandemic and I've been training and working so hard from home. Jamie, anything you want to say to introduce yourself to the planning commissioners?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you. It's nice to meet you all, and hopefully you'll see me again soon with some projects.
We look forward to having you.
Thank you.
What part of California?
I was in Long Beach, so near LA.
I was from Huntington Beach.
Oh,
Yay.
yeah.
SoCal.
Anything else, Lisa?
No, just wanted to remind the commissioners that we did have our zoning subcommittee meeting last week, which obviously four of you were there, right? And maybe some of you watched it. I thought it was a really great meeting. Hopefully you did as well. And our next one is June 9th. Is that right? Yeah, June 9th at 9 a.m. So quick turnaround. I think our memo to kind of summarize what happened at the last meeting and prep for the next one will come out tomorrow. So kind of fast and furious through that committee. And at our next meeting, we do have, I was going to look to see if it made it onto the agenda on the fly sheet, but I didn't. I stopped scrolling before you called on me. So it's not on there, but we do have a public hearing on the 15th, right, Shelby? I think Bryce has a public hearing.
Yes.
A pretty big one, or a big case, I guess I should say. So we'll have that, and we do have another work session with some more code amendments, although I can't tell you at this exact moment what chapters we'll be bringing. We'll see what Bryce has finished in time for next week to bring some more code chapters, because we're working fast and furious on code updates. So that's all I have. Otherwise, thank you.
Any questions of Lisa?
I have a little comment.
You sure may.
Zach will be covering the next planning commission meeting. So in case there's any coordination that needs to happen, I'll be here the week before when the agendas and everything go out. But if there's like little last minute things on Monday, that'll be with Zach. So,
great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Who let her take vacation? Jeez.
Wow. Okay, well, with no other questions, are there any comments for the good of the order from the commissioners?
I have one.
Commissioner Copcho?
It's about setbacks. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, you're welcome. No, I had the opportunity to serve as guest counselor for city. Nice mug, Commissioner McKinley. Guest city councilor last week. And it was an enlightening 3-hour experience that puts a lot of perspective on what I consider somewhat grueling planning commission meetings, which is to say that by comparison, we've got it pretty easy. So I appreciate all of you. So that's all I got to say.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Copcho. Any other comments for the good of the order?
Any idea when we're going to get back together physically?
Lisa?
No, I haven't heard. And I think, yeah, was it the zoning subcommittee? I think somebody asked that, and Councillor Hoy said, you know, he thought it would be all of us at kind of the same time when City Hall opened up. What I've been hearing is that we're still kind of monitoring the vaccination rate across the state, or when the county is designated, I think, low risk, but it sounds like maybe now the governor's just waiting for the vaccination to hit a certain rate. So it seems like it might just be 1 week, boom, we can all go back. And so if that's the case, I think council would definitely want to start in person, potentially in person for the counselors, but not the public. Maybe they would keep testifying over Zoom or something like that. So it's kind of changing day by day. We're just constantly, what about this? What about that? Maybe this, maybe that. And so, yeah, we'll keep you posted as soon as we know. But
right.
Soon, maybe.
Yeah. Any other comments for the good of the order? Seeing none, I will adjourn this meeting, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. You guys take care.